Hi, this is Anna Imagination with the Healing Garden, and welcome to Shifting Perspectives. If you are new to my work, I am a philosopher, psychologist, sociologist of 30 years. Today is the day I am officially declaring my research complete. This morning, I'm getting ready to upload a video here very shortly. After this video, this is what I'm going to be working on, where it's not public. It is going to be a private video, and I'm going to be sharing it with a friend of mine who is a psychologist for her to review. I recorded my session per her request, per her permission, per her consent, where I walked her through triadic healing and the cognitive core with the logical fallacy. And over the course of the explanation, she was able to locate the logical fallacy, remove it, and that corrected all of the mislogic inside of her head that allowed her to then step back and say, I no longer have this. And it happened literally instantaneous. I caught it on record. I'm sending it over to the psychologist for evaluation, and then we're going to be monitoring her behavior for the next few days. And if it all checks out, boom, I believe I have, she actually is the one who did it, the first ethic, the misleading belief that leads to the first ethic. This logical fallacy is the core to addiction, alcoholism, self-mutilation, and eating disorders. So if you can locate this logical fallacy inside of your mind, remove it, downgrade it to a fear, you'll literally cure your own addiction or whatever it is you're dealing with, whether it be self-mutilation and or eating disorders. Every addiction, every impulse, gone. So we're putting it through the test to confirm it, but it looks like it's all set. Now, there was a consequence to this because it was the last piece of the puzzle. I couldn't figure out the first ethic because babies don't talk. I couldn't figure it out. And I did have a problem with the first ethic very early on in my life. But because I solved it without doing the theory work, this is why theory work is so important. I wasn't able to articulate the mindset to pass it on from person A to person B. It's logically checking out. Like it was the logical piece. It's the very first ethic. It's the foundation. As soon as that piece went in, the whole triadic healing compass, the whole philosopher's compass went boom to boom. And then it did that 4 times right down to the 12th. I could see it and it just clicked all together. The whole model of triadic healing finished. And that opened the last and final door of my research, which is what is the human existence? And this is where we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. This is not going to be pleasant for a lot of people. We were conditioned to believe that this is unethical, and it's not. And I can prove it. The elephant in the room is, what is the value of an individual? It is the summation of the ultimate questions, the 4 questions that Socrates was asking. Who are we? What are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? The ultimate question that these 4 things stem from is the question, what is our value? X. Philosophy solves for X. Identity. What is the value of identity? This is economics. When you accumulate all of psychology, when you accumulate all of philosophy, mathematics, chemistry, physics, all of it, you are solving for X. What is our value? In order to understand what our value is, we must first define the self. What is our value? What is our worth? What are our resources? This is what we are doing in the first ethic. We are defining our value of self. Our value of self comes from what we love. Love is our self value. Who is this God person anyway? God is love, and love is our defined self value. What we love determines our value. The more you love, the more value you have. Are you ready for this? Once you have that established, the next stage is learning how to access and use our resources, which is all we are doing when we are 2 years old. It's when we're running around and we're trying to help mom and dad with all the chores because we're trying to teach ourselves our value and our resources. And then in the third ethic, we are learning how to integrate them into a community. You can have your value and you can have your resources. You can use your resources, but if you don't know how to integrate them into an emotional transaction to get an actual network flowing, you are not going to be able to integrate your self value and your self worth and your resources into a network. This is where it all comes back down to economy, communication, community, networking, business, transactions, and how we transfer from our self-worth and our individual defined resource into helping others and bridging the gap so we can connect with other human beings. Once that is done, you basically have value X, which is the identity, and value Y, which is our resources. And we are learning in the third ethic how to compound X and Y to create a new chemistry, a new entity referred to as XY. This is why we need to study chemistry so we can comprehend this, so we can see this. A new compound, a new element, then is born from the combination of X and Y, and that is when we have a new element. Then, when you are done with that transaction, the next part is nurturing value and growth, which is what the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth perspective are all about. So, in the first, second, and third perspective, in psychology and in philosophy, what we are doing is we are creating a compound, chemistry. And in the fourth, fifth, and sixth perspective, we are growing and nurturing that compound. This is why I call them cultivators. When we are cultivating and nurturing those compounds, we are using our ability to self-govern, be accountable, and sixth perspective, learn equality. That way, we learn how to stabilize the compound. In order to do that, you require the defined value of the self, X, Y, resources, and the ability to integrate X and Y into a community so that you have a new compound XY. Then, in the fourth, fifth, and sixth ethics, you take that new compound of X and Y and you use self-government, accountability, and equality to nurture it, expand it, and grow it. In the seventh, eighth, and ninth perspective, the next purpose, the next goal is to communicate and transfer information and knowledge via learning, teaching, and the passing of information from point A to point B. This is creation. If you do not know how to learn, then you cannot receive. If you do not know how to teach, then you cannot give or transfer. And you might have information, but that information or that resource is going to stay with you indefinitely and it's never going to move on. It will remain stagnant, which is the problem we have with our community right now, is we have stagnant information, stagnant resources. We must learn how to flow our resource. In order to do that, we have to understand how we connect to community. And in order to do that, we must define the self. So in the 7th, 8th, and 9th perspective, in the 7th perspective, you learn how to listen and learn. In the 8th perspective, you learn how to talk and how to teach. And in the 9th perspective, you learn how to negotiate. That allows you the ability to have a conversation so you can then transfer the data from point A to point B, and now you have flow. But it's not just the flow. It's not just the resource. It actually rides off of an emotional transaction, a balance of emotions, logic, and the integration and use of both of them to get a current. In order to do that, you require the 10th, 11th, and 12th perspective. The 10th perspective, you learn about emotions. The 11th perspective, you learn about logic. And the 12th perspective, you learn about the current that balances emotion with logic so you can carry the communication and the negotiations, that balance of silence with communication and talking in a blend so that you can transfer the data from point A to point B or transfer the resource from point A to point B. And that is done after you cultivate with the comprehension of being able to govern, which is to make ethical choices, with being able to hold yourself accountable for the ethical transaction, with your ability to value all equality. So value is the cultivator's ethic. Value is the cultivator's ethic. It is the appraisal. And the first ethic, the first part of this, the first, second, third ethic, the foundationals are to define the resource. So for the first ethic, the foundational, it's all about your resources, what they are, what others have, and how to combine them into a new resource. Foundations are all about appraising the value of your resources. And then the 3rd, 7th, 8th, and 9th transaction is all about negotiating and transferring that data over into an emotional exchange, basically being able to pass it from point A to point B. It is the transference of those resources. And then the last one is carrying it along the currency. Economics. Every time we make a friend, a connection, a romantic encounter, every time we meet a coworker, every time we are given a choice, what is going on behind all of that is the logical deduction and assessment. Does this have value? Does it cost me anything? What is going to be the rate of exchange? And if the answer is low ROI, you're not going to do it. If you have a high risk to reward, you're not going to do it. We look at energy preservation. We look at our resources. Now, let's throw trauma in the middle of this. Trauma happens when you realize or you believe that you have a limited resource or undefined resource. This then trips us over into scarcity mindset, which then translates or then becomes preservation of resources. When this occurs, your preservation of resources, you become either a giver or a taker. In most cases, you will become a taker. In fact, I bet everything on it with my brain that you become a taker when you enter into a preservation of resources. Now, a giver is somebody who is raised inside the mindset, but the taker is the one who enforces the mindset. The taker is the one who enforces, the giver is the one who enables the enforcement. So the taker says, we have a limited amount of resources. Let's preserve. Here's the plan. This is why they are the one in control, and they become a controller of resources. That way they can preserve, which is fantastic in a time of actual deprived resources. And then the giver, they assume the role of, I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. There's a gap. I don't know. I have X. I'm just going to call this X because it's currently an unknown. I haven't figured this part out yet. What ends up happening is the taker uses the giver or turns the giver into, and this is where it gets ugly, into a host. The taker turns the giver into a resource farm. This is where it's going to get real fucking ugly. Sorry, guys. The giver becomes a resource farm for the taker. This is churning my stomach. The giver goes from being a person and an individual to being farmed by the taker for its resources. But in order to guarantee its cooperation, the taker convinces the giver that the giver has zero value. So in order to pull this off, X identity equals 0. When X equals 0, the giver becomes a host that is farmed for its resources. Now, the taker also believes that their X equals 0, and because they are ruled by the preservation of resources, the taker, to replenish their own resources, begins to farm the giver. The giver associates love and purpose with being farmed, and the taker associates love with having somebody being the farm. The philosopher's compass interrupts the preservation of resources and recalibrates the entire mindset of preservation of resources mindset back to X equals worth and self-love. With that restored, the giver stops being farmed and becomes an identity again. The taker then is forced to reevaluate themselves, and they have to, on their own, define X equals identity. But the taker and the giver have to learn the same lesson through different methods. The giver has to learn this method through self-preservation, while the taker has to learn this method through self-isolation. But that's not what's happening. In our society, the taker will not allow self-isolation, and the giver has a significant aversion to self-isolation. So, to help the taker, they will enable the taker's mindset by preventing self-isolation from the taker with, I can't leave you alone. And that's exactly what the taker requires so that it will activate the lesson being learned of X equals identity. Once this codependent symbiosis ends, parasite ends, then the giver stops being a giver, stops being farmed, actually, and they become a healthy, interdependent resource back inside the flow of the network and the community. Meanwhile, the taker re-identifies X equals identity, and that allows them to learn that they too can plug into the network. In both cases, the preservation of resources ends, and because you tune back into the network, you no longer have a limited supply, which ends the hoarding, which ends the scarcity mindset, which allows you to end the codependent cycle of giver and taker, or I should say, farmed and taker, farmed and farmer, and it puts you back into the network where you can have a replenished supply of resources with abundance. There's enough for all to go around. Triadic healing is designed to literally recalibrate, plug you back into a network, rebalance and reconfigure the resources so there's enough for all. At this time, we only take givers and doers. You must be both a giver and a doer, because if you plug a taker into this, they will absolutely divide and conquer the network, and they will siphon off all of the energy and all of the resources, and they will absolutely, it's like putting a virus through it, which is why we only accept the givers and the doers. You must be both a giver and a doer. If you are a giver but you're not a doer, it's because you have not yet evolved through the early stages of healing yet to finally step forward to say, I'm ready to start changing my life. Otherwise, the giver who's not a doer will become a siphon and an agent of the taker. Once we start correcting for this balance, the upper, higher, advanced thinking part of our brain will turn on, and these stages of growth will continue. They will take over and they will proceed. We will then see us advance from the sixth perspective, and we will evolve healthy the way we were supposed to healthy. Once you get to the sixth perspective, people stop being violent. All violence ends at the sixth perspective because you have learned equality and accountability. It is the combination of equality and accountability that equals peace. That is how we're getting to world peace. We're all evolving to the sixth perspective, but we can't evolve to the sixth perspective until we learn the first three ethics and then 4, 5, and 6 ethic. As soon as we do that, we get our world peace. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are interested in learning more, click on the link below. Thank you so much, and may the kindest of words always find you.